The Olympics showcase some of humanity's greatest sporting achievements, and with the Paris 2024 Olympics in full swing, we've decided to compile a list of the greatest Olympic athletes to compete in the UFC. While boxing has a rich history of Olympic medalists turning pro, from names like the great Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather in the 90s to current-day Anthony Joshua, MMA in its 30-year history doesn't have as large a participatory rate, which is why we're going to highlight some of the best athletes in the Olympic Games who've competed in the UFC. We'll start off with number 1, Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier, while didn't win a gold medal or in fact medal in the Olympics, is one of the best wrestlers to have walked into the UFC. He competed in the 2008 Beijing Olympics and had to withdraw from his bronze medal match because of kidney failure. I think he was competing at 185 or 187 pounds at the time. And as you can see, our man likes to eat, right? So he was not going to be able to make the weight and had to forfeit the medal to somebody else. But one of the most skilled fighters in the heavyweight divisions in the UFC. In fact, one of the few double champs, light heavyweight champ and heavyweight champion. One of the most accomplished Olympians who's ever walked into the UFC. Up next, we've got Henry Cejudo, and although a lot of people call him the king of cringe, he kind of labels himself as that. Triple C is actually a very accomplished Olympian to sheer technical ability more than anything else. He was a gold medalist at the 2012 London Olympics, and he made his UFC debut, I think, in 2016, right? Like Daniel Cormier, he's one of the few double champions as well in the lighter weight divisions. And if you guys all know, it's one of the more difficult things to achieve in mixed martial arts is to become a double champion in the lighter weight division. There are very few fighters who've done that. I think it's only BJ Penn, Conor McGregor, and Henry Cejudo. He made his debut in the UFC 2016, lost his first title fight against Demetrius Johnson, rather brutal fashion after being kneed in the midsection, and then went on an absolute tear, right? Won the flyweight championship from Demetrius Johnson, defended it against completely dehydrated TJ Dillashaw, moved up in weight, won the bantamweight title against Marlon Moraes, defended it against Dominic Cruz, and then retired. And even though now his skills aren't up to the par, he's 37 years old, he's getting a bit up there in age, we still have to appreciate the fact that this guy was a gold medalist who walked into the UFC and became a double champion. Next, we've got what I would think would be one of the more famous fighters on this list. We've got Ronda Rousey. For you guys who don't know, Ronda Rousey is instrumental in the growth of women's mixed martial arts in the UFC. If it wasn't because of her, we wouldn't have a UFC women's division. She medaled in the 2008 Beijing Olympics in judo. I think she won the bronze medal there, and straight away made her transition into mixed martial arts and just started arm-barring girls. At that point of time, nobody had seen an athlete of that caliber. Her grappling skills were absolutely phenomenal. Girls had no idea how to deal with what judo calls newaza, which is the ground game. Her speed at which she would move, like even black belts were having trouble dealing with this girl. It was only until she met a more formidable opponent like Holly Holm where she really faced resistance and was knocked out, and then Amanda Nunes. Look, and whether you like her or not, you have to admit that Ronda Rousey is probably the most important woman in mixed martial arts today. She's probably the most influential figure in that part of the game. Up next, we've got the soldier of God, Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero medaled in the 2008 Olympics, won a silver medal there, and the match is available online where he takes on one of the Satiev brothers, who, I mean, it was a beautiful technical wrestling match that you could see, like, you know, Yoel was more explosive, had the power and the speed, but the Satiev brother was just better technically. Yoel made his debut in the UFC, I think 2016 as well, and went on, sure, did not win any titles, but was one of the most feared competitors in the middleweight division. He's got a KO loss up at light heavyweight, but then again, this is before the doctors fused his neck and the guy just couldn't turn his neck anymore. Which is why I guess he took like flush head kicks from Whitaker and didn't even flinch. But one of the most explosive fighters in the UFC's middleweight division, Yoel Romero, soldier of God. Up next, this is for one of the old school fans, all the old school fans out there. We've got Dan Henderson, one of the most beloved fighters in mixed martial arts, the inventor, creator, whatever you want to call it, of the H-bomb, put many lights out. He's competed in the UFC, Pride, Rings, Strikeforce. I mean, the guy's fought in almost every major promotion there is to fight. Made his debut in the UFC way back, I think the early 2000s, fought Carlos Newton, has fought Rampage Jackson, Anderson Silva. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. Dan Henderson was part of the US Olympic Greco-Roman team in 1992 and 1996. So this is like a long time back. And again, even though he didn't win a medal, he won 4th position and was a really, really good showing for him. Pride middleweight champion, Pride light heavyweight champion. came to the UFC, lost his titles there, but still put up a whole bunch of really, really cool fights. If you guys don't know, check out his two fights with Shogun, uh, Mauricio Hua. The most incredible fights. I think they won Fight of the Year when those two guys met up as well. Do check them out. That's Dan Henderson for you. One of the few guys that was a victim to Dan Henderson, Hector Lombard, makes this list. One of the more divisive fighters in mixed martial arts, often called a gym bully. Hector Lombard was a judoka, a very, very, very good judoka who represented Cuba in the 2000 games in Sydney. Even though he didn't medal there, he showed off a lot of skill and kind of like parlayed that skill into mixed martial arts when he moved into Bellator. Right before he came to the UFC, I think he was undefeated. It was just stopping guys in Bellator. And only when he came to the UFC did he meet like stiff resistance from guys like Tim Boach. He did give us a few good knockouts as well. Knocked out the scumbag that is Hujama Palhares. So one of the most satisfying knockouts in MMA, but really didn't live up to his potential as an Olympian. Hector Lombard, our next athlete, next Olympian up on the list, and even though he might not, he's probably the butt end of one of the worst knockouts in the UFC. We've got Ben Askren, Ben Funky Askren, Hodge Trophy winner, All-American NCAA Division I wrestler, was represented the United States in the 2012 London Olympics and in freestyle wrestling. What's there to be said about Ben Askren that he hasn't told us before, right? Like, he's a very, very good wrestler. And even though his run in the UFC wasn't as incredible as everyone expected it to be, it's his run before he got into the UFC that's impressive. The guy was 19-0, was just crushing dudes in Bellator and won. Sure, the UFC made a bad trade with Demetrius Johnson, but they got a loudmouth in Ben Askren who sold the hell out of the Masvidal fight. I mean, millions of dollars for 5 seconds, dude, I'd get knocked out as well. Up next on the list, another woman on the list, we've got Kayla Harrison, judoka, gold medalist at the 2012 Olympics and the 2016 Olympics, probably the most accomplished Olympian on this list. Like, this woman is for real, right? Like, you look at her and like, it's very clear Kayla Harrison is built to beat the shit out of like girls in the UFC's bantamweight division. She walked into the UFC with, I wouldn't say a spotty record, but she had a loss to Larissa Pachenko, split decision loss, but walked into the UFC and just handled Holly Holm. She's got explosive takedowns. Her striking is, as TJ Dillashaw says, absolute shit. But hey, it's the women's bantamweight division. The skill level is not as high as the men's. So like a woman like Kayla right now can just absolutely dominate. Very, very good fighter. I'm actually looking forward to seeing her next competition or next fight. One deep cut for old school MMA fans is old man Daniel Kelly. I don't know how many guys remember this dude, but he competed in the Olympics in 2012 in London and made his debut in the UFC. Again, not the best fighter on the roster, but like a solid old, like, you know, one of those like grizzled veterans. Had a few good wins, beat Rashad Evans, beat Antonio Carlos Jr., lost to Derek Brunson and Sam Alvey. But hey, you know, you're like, what, by the time I think he made his debut, he was like 40, 42 years old, like really old. You could see it, like, you know, his chest hair was grey. Not the best fighter out there, but still a very accomplished fighter, an Olympian nonetheless, right? Daniel Kelly from Australia. Up next, we've got one of the dirtiest fighters in the game, another old school guy, deep cut. I don't know how many guys have heard of this name. It's called Matt Lindland. Matt Lindland was an OG Team Quest member, same with Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, and all these guys who like kind of pioneered cage wrestling and cage takedowns in MMA. Matt Lindland represented the US in Greco-Roman wrestling in 2000 at Sydney and made his MMA debut shortly after. He was, you know, Matt Lindland, this story is about the guy like not bathing for weeks before he fought dudes so that he would smell so much and guys just would not, like, make things uncomfortable for him. Apparently in the gym, he was a gym bully. He's like, if you guys don't know, he was the guy that basically Brazilian tapped against Murilo Bustamante in his middleweight title fight and then got armbarred again. It's one of the more controversial title fights in UFC history. Got knocked out by a lot of guys. Matt Lindland is not the best fighter on the roster. He's a character. He really is. But if you haven't checked him out, do check him out. He looks like a troll anyways. He's a funny dude, Matt Lindland. And the last on this list, the legendary Randy Couture, represented USA in the Greco-Roman, if I'm not mistaken, in the late 90s. So what, 96 and then 2000. UFC light heavyweight champion as well. One of the most beloved figures in the sport. A guy who pioneered taking people down against the cage. The style of wall and brawling, putting guys up against the cage, beating them up there, not letting them off the cage. Randy Couture might not have the most pretty striking skills, or is not the greatest kickboxer, but he was a gritty, tough Greco-Roman wrestler who would grind you out. I remember his fight against Tim Sylvia, right? He came after like a 3-year retirement, something like that. And people were like, dude, this is Randy Couture is being fed to the wolves. He's fighting this guy who's like 6'8", 6'9", a monster in Tim Sylvia. Randy Couture, when the fight starts, fakes a leg kick and hits Tim Sylvia with the most beautiful right hand I've ever seen, overhand right. And from then on, dominated Tim Sylvia for 5 rounds to win the UFC heavyweight title. Sure, he lost it to another monster in Brock Lesnar, but he'll always be remembered as one of the pioneers of the sport, a guy who came in at a time when wrestling wasn't as defined and refined in MMA, and kind of did that, right? Brought a whole new kind of style of fighting to mixed martial arts. One of the more important fighters of his generation and in the history of mixed martial arts. Randy Couture, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, that's it for us. Thank you so much for watching. Do remember to support our Indian athletes at the Olympics this year. We do hope that some of our combat sports athletes do make their way into MMA. Who do you think is going to make their way into mixed martial arts? Let us know in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, comment on the video. And remember, live MMA now.